What's going on, everybody? We're going to be talking about players to fade at ADP in fantasy football for the year 2024. You're with your host, Justin Henry. You may have seen me on Yahoo Fantasy Sports. You see me at the FanDuel Sportsbook, TikTok, Sports Grid TV, you name it, talking fantasy football and NFL and NBA content as well. If you like that type of content, you want to win your fantasy league this year, make sure you hit the subscribe button, drop a like on this video so you can get all of my information all season long. Now, today we're going to be talking about fantasy football players to fade at their ADP. And the reason we're talking about fades is not because I don't believe in the player. This is not a don't draft list. This is not liking an ADP. When I say fade at ADP, that doesn't mean I don't like the player. I don't like their production. Most of the players I'm going to talk about, I would draft if I thought they were in a good spot. But in this instance, I just don't like their ADP. So we're going to be talking about them in a negative light. Don't get in your feelings, all right? This is just, we don't like the ADP. I always say this on my show. Fade the ADP, not the player, all right? So that's what we're doing here, just so you guys know. And if you want rankings, I have a link for that in my description. You can join my Dub Club and get my weekly rankings all season long. Also, if you sub here to the channel, you'll be able to see my video content throughout the remainder of the fantasy football season. All right, we're going to talk about wide receivers first. So some wide receivers that will be fading in fantasy football at their ADP. Now, a lot of these receivers are going to be good receivers, and all of them will be drafted in any league that's more than 8 teams. But in fantasy football, you got to look for value, right? And that's where can we find maybe a player that's overvalued and try to find somebody else in that range instead. So I have 5 to 6 receivers right now. One of them is kind of a major fade, and at a high draft capital. So be careful with this one, all right? But the first player I'm going to talk about is the wide receiver 12, according to Yahoo ADP. That's Chris Olave, and he had a decent season last year, over 1,100 yards. He had 5 touchdowns, but it's kind of what you're going to expect from Chris Olave, right? He was the wide receiver 16, so we've seen this in back-to-back years from Chris Olave now, around 1,000 yards, around 5 touchdowns, 75, 80 catches. This is just kind of who this player is at this point. And to expect more from that in the exact same role with the exact same players around him, same quarterback in Derek Carr, same running back in Alvin Kamara, same head coach, like same receiving core. There hasn't been any changes to this damn offense outside of the offensive coordinator. So unless Chris Olave grew 4 inches, unless he got some other kind of supersonic speed, unless his route tree is going to be expanded for this team throughout the year, what are we expecting out of Chris Olave? He's going to be the same damn player we've already seen, and you got to take him in the 2nd round. There's no upside. This dude's not hitting 1,500 yards. He's not hitting 10 touchdowns. He's not hitting 100 catches. Why are we taking him in the 2nd round when we got guys going after him that do have that capability? And we've seen him do it. That's the crazy part. We have receivers who have hit 1,300 yards. We have receivers who have hit 10 touchdowns. We have receivers who have hit 100 catches that are going after Chris Olave. So why are we taking this dude in the 2nd round at wide receiver 12? Make it make sense. If we got him in the 3rd, late 3rd, I'd be okay with that. But 2nd round draft capital for a guy that doesn't have wide receiver 1 upside is absolutely insane. I get it. He's a young player. Most of the time, young players make adjustments. But we've seen kind of what Chris Olave is. And unless he makes major improvements as a red zone player or as a consistent receiving threat receptions-wise, he increases his targets by 30, 40. Why are we expecting much different from Chris Olave? Chris Olave, a fade at his wide receiver 12 ADP currently. Next up. Now, it's a generational prospect. Generational, and I'm not throwing that out there lightly. His dad was in the NFL, Marvin Harrison Jr., currently going as the wide receiver 9. Wide receiver 9 in PPR leagues. How? You mean to tell me already in fantasy football, we're expecting the 9th best work right now out of Marvin Harrison Jr., his first year in the league? Okay, so maybe we saw Justin Jefferson. We've seen Jamar Chase come in and have massive rookie years. I get it. But to just assume that out of Marvin Harrison Jr., his first year is crazy. Kyler Murray has never thrown for 4,000 yards in his entire NFL career. The team has Trey McBride, who's probably going to be a 1,000-yard guy. So we know that the weapons are already there. but you're drafting him. Say Marvin Harrison does go for 1,200 yards. Say he goes for 1,300 yards. That's an incredible rookie year. But you're drafting that as a ceiling. He would finish as a wide receiver 9. So to get an amazing ceiling, a spectacular wide receiver 1 season out of Marvin Harrison, you're drafting him at the wide receiver 9 right now, and that's his ceiling. He's not getting 1,500 yards in this offense. He's not going to have 15 touchdowns, 100 catches. It takes rookies some time. So yes, it's a really good situation playing with the veteran quarterback, and I know the team took him early. He's the best receiver in the class. I get that. But in 12-team leagues, you can find better than that in the 2nd and 3rd round. Why are we reaching on a guy that's a rookie we've never seen step on the field that we're hoping gets to a Mike Evans level production? We're hoping he gets to a Devonta Adams level production. We're hoping he can get to a Brandon Ayuk level production. And you're taking him ahead of all of those guys. It doesn't make sense. All right, next up. You know, this is a player I really liked going into last season, and I think you had a good value on him last year. Currently, the wide receiver 11 in ADP, Nico Collins. Nico Collins, wide receiver 11? He was the wide receiver 12 in 15 games last year. So on paper, you're like, all right, cool. He had almost 1,300 yards last year, 8 touchdowns. Breakout year for Nico Collins. Congratulations. But are we forgetting something? Are we forgetting that this team just traded for a wide receiver in their prime? That's arguably a top 5 to 10 wide receiver in Stephon Diggs. Are we just acting like these targets aren't going to get soaked up by Stephon Diggs? Is he just that washed up to you guys that he's not going to play a role on this team? The team just traded for him and gave him all of his money in 1 year? Are we just going to act like that didn't happen? Are we going to act like CJ Stroud only didn't throw for just 4,000 yards last year? Are we really going to act like that? 4,100 yards for CJ Stroud last year. It wasn't like he was throwing for 5,000, 5,500 yards. So where are we getting wide receiver 11 out of Nico Collins unless you're just expecting Stephon Diggs to be like a 700-yard guy, which he's been a 1,000-yard receiver since his very early days in Minnesota. Nico Collins? Like, I get it. He had a breakout year last year, but are you going to draft that guy to be your number 1 wide receiver, maybe number 2 receiver if you take another one early, but your number 1 or 2 wide receiver when there's so many other options who are the clear lead dogs on our team? This is the same mistake we all made with Devontae Smith, Jaylen Waddle, and T. Higgins last year. It's the exact same mistake. Nico Collins is probably going to be the number 2. To some people, they like Tank Dell more than Nico Collins. So it's debatable that he could even be the wide receiver 3 on this team. I don't think that. I think he's a wide receiver 2. But to draft him at wide receiver 11 ADP is asinine. No, I get it. He's a good football player, and we love good football players. But in fantasy, we need to find clear identifications that they're going to be the number 1 receiver and have trajectory to blow the ADP out the water and have a higher ceiling than where we drafted him at. And Nico Collins, for as good as he was last year, is not the wide receiver 11. Let's just be frank. He's not. All right? You could do much better at wide receiver 11 than Nico Collins. Next up, we got another rookie, man. I'm not trying to hate on the rookies, but we got another rookie, Malik Neighbors. He's currently going as the wide receiver 20. Now, I hated this landing spot on draft day. I absolutely hated it because Daniel Jones is not the quarterback that you want to see throwing your guy the football if you're a wide receiver. He's never had an 800-yard receiver. So this would be breaking the mold at wide receiver 20. Malik Neighbors is going to have to come in and break the mold. I know it's the best receiver that Daniel Jones ever had, but now he's going to have to hit 1,000 yards. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed. Like, I see 805. I think that's a really good season for Malik Neighbors coming in as a rookie, especially with Daniel Jones at the quarterback position, who's never thrown for more than 3,200 yards. Even with Brian Daboll as the coach, like, I get that. So it would take a massive quarterback change, and who's to say that he comes in and finishes this season healthy? Daniel Jones, right? I get it. In Dynasty, I'd be all over it. Like, if this was a future look, yeah, we're going to be talking about Malik Neighbors as a guy that's a consistent 1,000-yard receiver. But in year 1, with Daniel Jones at quarterback, with all these other – Wan'Dale Robinson was a second-round pick. Jalen Hyatt was a third, fourth-round pick, whatever he was. We got all these other receivers. Darius Slayton, who's been a consistent target for Daniel Jones over the years. He's on his team. And we're just going to assume that Malik Neighbors is going to be a 1,000-yard guy. To draft him at wide receiver 20, he would have to hit 1,000 yards. Malik Neighbors ain't hitting no 1,000 yards this year. Daniel Jones has never had a 1,000-yard receiver. So I get it. It's fun to draft rookies. It's fun to get enamored with names. But there's a lot of receivers. Like Kyon Allen is going after Malik Neighbors. Calvin Ridley is going after Malik Neighbors. George Pickens is going after Malik Neighbors. Chris Godwin is going after Malik Neighbors. You can do much better in your draft than trying to reach for this guy, hoping that he can become the receiver that he will be eventually. This ain't the year for it. Malik Neighbors, we got to slow down on taking these rookies and assuming they're going to hit their ceiling in year one. Next up, a guy who played pretty well last year, Zay Flowers, played pretty well in his rookie year for the Baltimore Ravens. He finished as the wide receiver 31. Currently, he's going as the wide receiver 25. On paper, we're expecting, some kind of incremental increase from Zay Flowers this year and expecting him to be better in year two. I could see that. But there's not a whole lot of upside with this guy, man. He had 77 catches last year, 858 yards, 5 touchdowns. So what's the category that everybody probably thinks he'll be better in? What, yardage? For Lamar Jackson, who we know he hasn't really hit 4,000 yards yet. So I know the upside, like yardage-wise, maybe he could hit his first 1,000-yard season. I could see that. I could see that being a good season for Zay Flowers. But is this guy going to hit 8 to 10 touchdowns? Is he going to be a 90 to 100 catch guy? Nah. So in your mid-tier wide receiver 3, there's other players who could reach that. Your Chris Godwins, your George Pickens, your Kyon Allens. These guys, Terry McLaurin. We've seen these guys hit those milestones before, and we're taking Zay Flowers ahead of those guys now. So it's easy to think this Ravens offense, like, yeah, Zay Flowers takes another step. They also have a guy in Rashad Bateman who they've been talking up this year. We also have another guy, Mark Andrews, who's out for a good portion of the year. He will be returning this season, right? So, and Lamar Jackson himself has lost some weight. I'm anticipating he's going to be running the ball a little bit more this season. So if Zay Flowers, say he hits 1,000 yards, 80 catches, and 5 touchdowns, would that shock you? Nah, that'd be a good season for him. Just not wide receiver 25 level. So I think there's other guys with way more potential that are going around his same area. And if you want the safety, go ahead. Take Zay Flowers. He's a safe pick as your wide receiver 3. But if you're looking for more upside, which you should be in that range, I think there's players that could still reach that kind of production and exceed it at that same range. So Zay Flowers, I think he's going to be a good, phenomenal player in the league, obviously. But in fantasy, you're looking for a little bit more upside, especially in your PPR leagues. He's a stretch right now, wide receiver 25. I think you can do much better at the position than Zay Flowers. All right, and probably my most controversial fade, the controversial one. Can anybody explain why people think Jamar Chase should be the #1 pick in fantasy? Can anybody explain that? There's no reasonable thought to how Jamar Chase can reach the #1 receiver spot in fantasy football, let alone the 101 or first pick. I get it. There's people who think he's going to have like this big jump in performance. Are we not forgetting that Jamar Chase has only had one season over 1,400 yards? Are we not forgetting that his quarterback has been injury prone over the years? Are we not forgetting that Jamar Chase himself tends to get nicked up at times? Are we not forgetting that Jamar Chase had only 5 games last season over 9 targets? And this is the guy that we're expecting to be the #1 player in fantasy, top 3 receiver in fantasy. He's going right now as the wide receiver 3 over guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's been a consistent 1,400-yard guy, over Justin Jefferson, whose floor is 1,500 yards, over A.J. Brown, who's had back-to-back 1,400-yard seasons for the Philadelphia Eagles. T. Higgins is in a contract year. And last season, Jamar Chase averaged 16 fantasy points a game. That's supposed to translate now to wide receiver 1, 2, or 3? Where's the upside that everybody's seeing? He hasn't hit that marker since his rookie year when he caught everybody off guard. And last year when he scored 16 fantasy points a game, one of those games included a 50-point week. I get you can chase the upside, and yes, he could have a 40-point game any given week. But over the course of the season, we have yet to see Jamar Chase string together anything that suggests he'll be the wide receiver 1 or a top 3 option. You can look at CeeDee Lamb last year and be like, man, there's an example of a guy who, it took him a while, and then when he figured it out, he became the guy. But Jamar Chase isn't the possession receiver that CeeDee Lamb is. He's more of a big play guy, a yak guy. He makes things happen downfield. So to expect that out of Jamar Chase as the wide receiver 3, I think is completely insane. You can do better. I'd rather have A.J. Brown than Jamar Chase at this point. Why is he going as the top 3 receiver? Make it make sense. And then there's people that want to put him at the number 1 spot. You're just trying to be different. Recognize who Jamar Chase is, an elite wide receiver, but there's better options for your fantasy team. Don't get caught in the hype, man. There's too many question marks about Jamar Chase to take him as a top 3 receiver or the first receiver off the board. Do better than Jamar Chase. He is a fade at his current ADP right now. All right, so that did it for the receivers. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Is there anybody else being too harsh on? Anybody you agreed with? I know we hit some good points there. Let's talk about running backs now. All right, at the running back position, my first fade is the RB7, Devon Achane. Devon Achane, however we going to say it, right? Devon Achane. Devon Achane, running back 7. What are we doing now? He's a backup on his own team. I know he had the 51-point game that caught us all by a storm. And, he did dirt against the Broncos, 3 straight, 50, 20, 20. Like, I get it. He had a very good start to the season, caught a lot of people off guard. But let's not forget, this is an injury-prone running back. He's small. Dude is small, tiny. He was hurt before the season started, got hurt again in week 5, re-injured himself later in the year. He was injured 3 times last year. Now, the team signed Jaylen Wright, the team drafted Jaylen Wright. So now there's additional competition in the backfield. And he's asking to get more involved in the passing game. So we just expecting him to become a better running back all of a sudden? Like, say he's catching passes, that's fine. Get him a few more receptions. But it's not like this guy's just going to be 70-point runs and 70-point catches every single week. That's not how football works. We've got one player ever do that. That was Chris Johnson. He was crazy for one season, CJ2K. But after week 13 last season, Devon Achane averaged 14.6 fantasy points. Oh, what happened to all that fantasy points per game? He's over 20 fantasy points per game, top 3 fantasy points per game. After week 13, when everything settled down, when the season got tighter, he averaged 14.6. So this is a guy now you think should be going in the second round as the RB7? This is a guy you think can carry your fantasy team as your RB1? Are you kidding me? The Dolphins don't even believe that. Raheem Mostert is the starter. So the Dolphins ain't starting him. If we saw in the second half of the year what he really looked like, why are we taking this guy in round 2? I get it, the upside, Jahan. But what about the weeks where he doesn't score 10 fantasy points? What about the weeks where he's inconsistent? We also have to factor that in. We love the good that comes with fantasy. Sometimes we forget about the bad that comes along with players as well. Devon Achane going way too high at RB7. Next up, another player who is going a little higher than I think he should, but he at least earned it last year. Kyon Williams. He was the RB7 in only 12 games last year. He played 12 games and was the RB7. He had an incredible run. Over 1,100 yards rushing, 12 touchdowns. He did it in the receiving game as well. But he was hurt last year twice, right? To start the season, he was a little banged up, and then he got injured in the middle of the year as well. He's already hurt this offseason. And Sean McVay's already come out and said, look, we got to get less touches to Kyon this year. We got to take care of him. The team drafted 3rd-round pick Blake Corum, who is going to be a tank right there behind him. So they're looking to reduce Kyon Williams' workload. And we know how Sean McVay is. He's not a guy that likes to really run a committee. He likes to run one guy. And all the hype this offseason has been about how Blake Corum looks good. Kyron's got to get to training camp. And we're drafting a guy who's kind of smaller, a little bit injury prone, had a great season, reduced workload. We're drafting this guy now as a RB8, and that's where he finished last year in 12 games. I get it. He earned it. Kyon has earned his draft spot, but there's so many question marks that I'm fading him. He would have to replicate something that, we don't see this very often, a late round guy that gets an opportunity and then just kills it. We don't see this very often, and we don't see it last very long typically. So I think Kyren had an amazing season, all-pro year for Kyon Williams. Can we expect him to duplicate that? I think that's asking a lot. Now, if he does it on somebody else's fantasy team, congratulations, man. You won. You killed it. You got him at a good draft spot. But I'm not taking Kyon Williams as the RB8 with all them question marks and a guy that's lurking behind him that could probably vulture a lot of touchdowns as well. Kyon Williams is on my fade list, and it's not for the fact that I think he can't produce at that level. It's just there's so many other concerns with Kyon. I got to take a pass this year. Next up, this guy has climbed the draft boards for whatever reason this offseason. RB26, Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks, second-round draft pick out of Texas for the Carolina Panthers. Coming off of a torn ACL, we're taking this guy as a starting running back. He's an RB3, high-end RB3, back-end RB2, depending on how deep your league is, more of a mid-tier RB3. Now, he's the best runner in the draft, the best back in the draft, but he's coming off of a torn ACL, going to a bad offense in Carolina. This team has a lot to show that they can even move the ball downfield and score touchdowns. One of the worst team in football last year. Chuba Hubbard was the leading back last year. The team already said they believe in him. He came on strong towards the second half of last season. Why would you give a guy a full workload to start the year? Now I get it. Maybe his ACL is feeling better about 8 to 10 weeks in, and they let him become the starter in week 12, 13. That sounds about right for Jonathan Brooks. Slower load to start the season and then finish off strong. But to take that guy at RB26 means you believe he could be a flex option for you right now. That's a 0 RB starter. That's a guy that you truly think is going to be able to help you for a majority of the fantasy season. When we don't even know when he's going to get the opportunity to start, if he does. He's got to be ready for training camp. All indications are that he should, but coming off of an ACL, who knows if that's the case? If he is ready for a training camp, he's still got to earn his role as a number 2 back. Coaches are going to make him do that. I think he will earn that role. How will he produce? Then he's got to overtake Chuba Hubbard in order for this RB26 draft spot to be worth it. Might he be a value down the stretch when fantasy playoffs hit? Cool, but you have to roster this guy all throughout that whole time and not drop him, not get impatient. So at RB26, there's a ton of other really nice running backs that are going around that range. I think you could do much better and get a little bit more upside than Jonathan Brooks, who you're taking right now as kind of a leap of faith. He's going to be ready for the second half of the year when you need him most. All right. At RB18, David Montgomery. He's the RB18 right now, and last year he had a really good season, caught a lot of us off guard, finishes the RB17, had a really nice start to the season, man. Like at the beginning of the season, he was averaging 20 fantasy points a game for the first 5 weeks, and then he got hurt. And what happened? This team drafted Jamar Gibbs early last year. They wanted to use him, and they were holding him back to start the season, made him earn his role. But by the time David Montgomery got healthy and came back, Jamar Gibbs had already emerged. He's now a first, second-round pick in fantasy football. And after Jamar Gibbs earned that workload, we rarely saw David Montgomery play more than 50% of the snaps. I think it was one time he played more than 50% of the snaps. During that time, he averaged 13.6 fantasy points and was very, very touchdown dependent. We're taking this guy now at the RB18, which maybe in hindsight, he should have went there last year. But now that Jamar Gibbs is expected to take a bigger role in this offense, expected to be a bigger part of this offense, now we have to acknowledge, all right, David Montgomery, you're the backup running back now. Maybe you're using the red zone, but they're not even using him exclusively in the red zone like they did early in the year. He's going to be limited. He's not going to have the same impact. Unfortunately, I think David Montgomery we're thinking of is the David Montgomery from early in the season and not the player we saw towards the end when Jamar Gibbs took over the starting role. Be careful with drafting David Montgomery. That's a player I'm fading at his current ADP of RB18. All right, and then the last player I want to talk about, I've talked about this player a lot, Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren at the RB25. So for Jaylen Warren, you know, he played well last year, man. I'm a big Najee Harris guy, so this might seem a little biased to some that are watching the channel. But he finishes at RB22 last year, was really involved in the passing game, had 61 receptions out the backfield. Nice season for Jaylen Warren. But this is a new offense now, a brand new offense. And we got a running back who's lost some weight, inspired in Najee Harris, a power back, and Arthur Smith is running this offense now. And guess what he loves? Power football. He loves to get those power backs involved. We saw it with his time with Tyler Algier in Atlanta. We saw it with Derrick Henry in Tennessee. Loves power football. And do I think Jaylen Warren could be good? Yeah, but to draft him right now amongst the starting running backs, when I think there's better options as starters that are going after him, to me is a little concerning, right? You got guys that could be like game changers in Tajee Spears, potentially Tony Pollard, guys like Zach Moss, Chase Brown. You're getting where you know you're getting at least a starting caliber type player coming out the backfield. So to me, it's tough to draft Jaylen Warren that high. At RB25, I think he should be slotted a little bit lower. I would rather have some other players with higher upside tied to maybe better positions in their offense outside of a back. You know, he's kind of a pass catching back that you're hoping will get there, right? He doesn't have the same upside as some of the backs that are starters that can get you touchdowns. All his work's going to be in the receiving game. He's kind of more like a Shane Vereen type running back, in my opinion. So can he do it all? Yeah. Can he be could he reach that spot? Absolutely. But I'm not drafting him at that spot when there's other higher caliber players that are going after him. So I'm more concerned about the ADP right now with Jaylen Warren. I think he'll probably finish out around the RB3s or 4s. Like, that doesn't sound out of the picture. But to draft him as potentially your RB2 or to draft him and know that you don't have any upside is good enough reason to fade him for me. So I'm out on Jaylen Warren this year as the RB25. If he hits it, I wouldn't be surprised, but I am out. I think that I would draft other players instead. All right, so that does it for running backs. Let me know what you guys thought about the running backs. If you agreed, disagreed, was I off on any? For that, this has been an edition of the Fades. Make sure you guys subscribe and like the video. I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.